The grand ballroom of Vance House, all gilded plaster and Venetian crystal, fell silent not by degrees, but as if a bell only dogs could hear had suddenly sounded. It was a silence that spread outwards from the great arched doorway, a ripple of quiet that froze champagne flutes midway to painted lips and stilled the flutter of 100 silk fans. Lord Alistair Beaumont, Marquis of Westfall, stood near the orchestra, his smile fixed, his posture a study in aristocratic ease. But as he turned, following the gaze of his guests, the smile did not so much vanish as it did shatter, leaving behind a mask of pale, bloodless confusion. There, framed by the doorway, stood his betrothed Miss Amelia Vance. She was meant to be on his arm, the radiant, compliant jewel of the evening. Instead, she stood alone. She wore a gown not of bridal white or debutante ivory, but of sapphire silk so deep it drank the candlelight, a colour of midnight and authority. Her hair was not dressed in soft ringlets, but swept up in a severe, elegant chignon, revealing the determined line of her jaw. Beside her, her father's solicitor, Mr. Davers, a man as grey and solid as a bank vault, held a slim leather folio. Amelia's expression was not one of anger, nor of sorrow. It was the calm, placid face of a woman who had come, not to a celebration, but to a reckoning. She began to walk, her steps measured and unhurried on the polished marble floor. The rustle of her silk was the only sound in the vast room. She did not look at the astonished faces of the London society that had gathered to toast her engagement. Her eyes were fixed solely on Lord Alistair, and with every step she took, another drop of colour drained from his handsome face. He started to move towards her, his mouth opening to form a question, a protest, but he stopped as if he had walked into a wall of glass. Amelia had reached the centre of the room. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the silent, watching crowd before returning to him. Mr. Davies opened the folio. To understand the silence that held 500 of England's most powerful people in its grip, to comprehend the quiet devastation that was about to unfold, we must return not to the beginning of the evening, but to the beginning of the deception. Before we witness what happened next, we invite you to subscribe for more stories of quiet strength and public vindication. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. The story of Amelia Vance truly began not in a London ballroom, but in a warm, book-lined study smelling of pipe tobacco and oiled machinery at the knee of her father, the late industrialist Thomas Vance. While other girls of her station were learning needlepoint and watercolour, Amelia was learning the intricate dance of numbers in a ledger. Her father, a man whose hands were never quite free of the faint stain of engine grease, believed a woman's mind was a tool, not an ornament. He had built an empire from iron and steam, and he bequeathed to his only daughter not just his fortune, but his shrewd, practical intelligence. They would share suppers of simple roast chicken and buttered carrots, spread out over blueprints on the vast mahogany dining table, her father explaining the flow of capital as easily as another might explain a fairy tale. Her happiness was a thing of substance, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. When her father passed, Amelia, at 23, was left one of the wealthiest heiresses in England, and one of the loneliest. It was then that Lord Alistair Beaumont entered her life, a figure from a world as alien to her as the moon. He was all old titles and effortless charm, his family estate, Westfall, a name whispered with reverence. He spoke of poetry, not profit margins, of lineage, not logistics. Amelia, who had known only the straightforward world of commerce, was captivated. Their courtship was a whirlwind of public spectacle and private tenderness. He brought her sugared violets and first-edition books. They rode in the park, his hand warm and steady on hers. He seemed to admire her sharp mind, calling her his gloriously clever Amelia. And for the first time, she felt her father's legacy was not a burden to be managed, but a jewel that made her desirable. A preliminary agreement was drawn, the engagement to be announced at a grand ball she would host in her father's London townhouse. She had never felt such hope. The golden beginning felt solid, real, a foundation upon which a life could be built. The first crack in that foundation appeared not with a thunderclap, but with a quiet remark over dinner. They were dining with Alistair's mother, the Dowager Marchioness, a woman with a spine as straight and unyielding as the whalebone in her corset. The talk had turned to the Vance foundries. "Alistair tells me you still read the weekly reports," the Dowager said, her tone laced with a faint, amused disbelief. "How industrious!" Before Amelia could reply, Alistair laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "My darling, you mustn't worry your pretty head with such things now. You have me to handle the dreary business of trade." He reached across the table, patting her hand as one might a clever terrier that had performed a trick. "Your concern with shillings and pence is admirable, but it is hardly the province of a marchioness." The words, meant to sound like a compliment, landed like a slap. He had always praised her mind. Now, in front of his mother, it was a quaint eccentricity to be retired, like a childhood toy. A week later, she was in the morning room reviewing accounts when he entered. He glanced at the ledger on her lap. "Still playing shopkeeper, my love?" he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Come, leave that. My mother wishes for you to accompany her to the modiste. Choosing silks is of far greater import today." He steered her from the room, gently closing the door on the world of numbers she understood so well. The humiliations were always quiet, always wrapped in the language of care. She was told to rest upstairs when her own factory managers came to call. She was excluded from meetings with solicitors, Alistair assuring her it was all frightfully dull. At a garden party, she overheard a snippet of conversation between Alistair and a friend. "She has a surprisingly firm grasp of figures," the friend noted. "Yes, a vestige of her upbringing," Alistair replied, his voice smooth as cream. "We shall civilize her yet." Each dismissal was a small stone laid upon her chest, the weight accumulating slowly, almost imperceptibly. Her son, were she to have one, would inherit her fortune. But she, it seemed, was not to be trusted to steward it herself. She did not argue. She did not weep where they could see. She simply watched, her composure a perfect, placid mask, and behind it, the keen, analytical mind her father had forged began to work. She had been courted for her inheritance. She began to suspect she was being married for it alone. The suspicion solidified into a cold, hard certainty one Tuesday afternoon. A clause in the preliminary marriage contract, which Alistair had assured her was standard, granted him full administrative control over her assets upon the public announcement of their engagement. Her solicitor, Mr. Davies, a man who had served her father for 30 years, had advised against it with a troubled look in his eye. "It is unusually swift, Miss Vance," he had said. Alistair had charmed her concerns away, calling it a matter of form, a way to unify their holdings and present a strong front to the world. Now his casual dismissals of her competence made the clause seem less like a formality and more like a cage. She knew she could not confront him. He would deny it with that same easy charm, making her feel foolish and suspicious. She needed proof. She needed to understand the true state of his affairs, not the grand facade he presented to the world. And so, an audacious plan formed in her mind, a plan born of the very practicality he so disdained. She summoned Mr. Davies. "I wish to see Westfall Manor," she told him, "not as a guest, but as a ghost." The old solicitor's eyebrows shot up. "Miss Vance?" "I want to work there, as a housemaid, for the week leading up to the ball." The plan was shockingly simple. Westfall was in the country, a world away from London society. The staff was small and isolated. A cousin of Mr. Davies's clerk knew the housekeeper, a Mrs. Gable, and it was known she was temporarily in need of an extra pair of hands. A story was concocted. Anna, a distant relation of the clerk, quiet, hard-working, seeking a place. Amelia prepared for the role with meticulous care. She scrubbed her hands with coarse soap until the skin was rough, trading her silk gowns for a drab grey wool dress and a starched white apron. She practiced keeping her eyes downcast, her voice soft and unobtrusive. The transformation was startling. Stripped of her finery, she was no longer Miss Vance, the great heiress. She was simply Anna, a girl who could polish silver and empty fireplaces, a girl no one would ever look at twice. It was the perfect disguise. She would become invisible, and in the great houses of England, the invisible servants were the ones who saw and heard everything. Her first few days as Anna were a blur of aching muscles and the humbling reality of a servant's life. She rose before dawn, her hands raw from lye soap and cold water. She learned the geography of the house through the endless corridors, the grand decaying rooms, and the draughty servants' quarters. Westfall Manor, for all its ancestral grandeur, was deeply frayed at the edges. Dust motes danced in the thin sunlight slanting through grimy windows. The tapestries were faded, the carpets worn thin. It was a house gasping for breath, starved of the funds needed to maintain its own magnificent weight. Lord Alistair and his mother lived only in a small wing, the rest of the great house shut up in dusty silence. Amelia served them their meals, her head bowed, her presence utterly ignored. They spoke in front of her as if she were a piece of furniture. It was on the fourth evening that her purpose there was fulfilled. She was tasked with polishing the silver presentation trays in the pantry adjoining the library. The door to the library was ajar, a sliver of light cutting across the stone floor. Alistair and the Dowager were inside, their voices sharp and clear in the evening quiet. "The contracts are all prepared for Saturday," Alistair was saying. "The moment the announcement is made, her foundries, her shipping concerns, everything, falls under my administration. And not a moment too soon." The Dowager's voice was like ice chipping. "The creditors are becoming vultures. That ridiculous little man from the bank had the audacity to call again today." "Let him call," Alistair said, a note of triumph in his tone. "After Saturday, he will be begging for an audience. Vance's fortune will solve everything. We can reopen the East Wing, restore the gardens. Westfall will be the talk of London again." Then came the words that stopped Amelia's heart. "Are you certain she will not resist?" the Dowager asked. "The girl fancies herself clever with numbers." Alistair laughed, the same light, dismissive laugh she had heard at the dinner table. "Her cleverness is her cage. She is so proud of her shopkeeper's mind that she cannot see the larger picture. She thinks she is entering a partnership. She has no idea she is simply the key to a vault. Once she is Marchioness, she will be occupied with gowns and guest lists. The golden goose will be too busy nesting to notice her eggs are gone." In the pantry, Amelia stood frozen, the polishing cloth still in her hand. The silver tray in front of her reflected a pale, ghostly face she barely recognized. Golden goose. The phrase echoed in the silent corridor, stripping away the last vestiges of her romantic illusions. It was not a marriage. It was an acquisition. The shock did not last. It was swiftly replaced by a cold, clear anger that settled deep in her bones, not hot and reckless, but patient and methodical. It was the same focus she felt when reviewing a complex balance sheet, the same clarity her father had when diagnosing a problem in a steam engine. The game was revealed. Now she had to win it. Her greatest asset was that they still believed her to be a fool in love, safely tucked away in London preparing for her grand debut as a Marchioness. They had no idea their golden goose was currently sleeping in a drafty attic room, listening to the very foundations of their crumbling house groan at night. She needed more than their words. She needed proof that would stand up in the court of public opinion, if not a court of law. She needed their books. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a stern woman with surprisingly kind eyes, had taken a quiet liking to Anna. She noted the girl's refined speech, her unnaturally soft hands despite the work, and the intelligence in her gaze when she thought no one was watching. Mrs. Gable had served the Beaumonts for 40 years and harboured no illusions about their character. She saw the desperation beneath their arrogance. One evening, as Amelia was helping her lock up, Mrs. Gable pressed a small, cold key into her hand. "The library grate needs a thorough blacking before the master returns from London," she said, her gaze steady and meaningful. "You'll need to be in there before the fires are lit tomorrow. The east-facing windows give the best light, just as the sun rises." She said nothing more, but the message was clear. It was a key to the library and an offering of time. That night, Amelia did not sleep. An hour before dawn, she slipped through the silent house, the key cold in her palm. The library was frigid, smelling of old paper and decay. By the first grey light of dawn, she found what she was looking for, hidden behind a false panel in the wainscoting. A second ledger. It was not the pristine book shown to solicitors, but a mess of spidery ink detailing the crushing reality of their debts, the mortgages held against the estate, and, most damningly, a detailed plan for the allocation of the Vance capital, with funds earmarked to pay off personal gambling debts Alistair had accrued in London and Paris. With trembling hands, she took out the small notebook and pencil she had concealed in her apron. For 2 hours, as the sun rose, she sat on the cold floor, meticulously copying the key entries, the dates, the figures. Her father had taught her that numbers did not lie. These numbers told a story of profound deceit. She finished just as the house began to stir, replacing the ledger and slipping away unseen. That afternoon, a stable boy trusted by Mrs. Gable rode to the nearest town with a letter for Anna's sick mother. The letter contained the copied pages, sent by special post to Mr. Davies in London, along with a short, urgent message. "The ball will proceed as planned. Make the necessary preparations." The evening of the engagement ball arrived, a night of crystalline cold and brilliant stars over Mayfair. At Westfall, Lord Alistair dressed with the smug satisfaction of a man whose victory was assured. He selected his finest waistcoat, humming a tune from a popular opera. He imagined the envy on the faces of his peers, the relief of his creditors, the restoration of his family's glory. His bride, his pretty, clever, and entirely manageable bride, would be waiting for him, ready to hand over her fortune and her future with a docile smile. He was not marrying a woman. He was executing a merger that would save his entire world. He felt no guilt, only a sense of profound aristocratic entitlement. Meanwhile, in London, at Vance House, a transformation of a different kind was taking place. Amelia soaked in a hot bath, scrubbing away the last of the grime and weariness of her week as Anna. She emerged not as the diminished housemaid, nor as the naive fiancée, but as something new, forged in the cold library of Westfall. She was her father's daughter, entirely. Her lady's maid, Sarah, laid out the sapphire gown. It was a calculated choice. The colour of commerce, of ink on a contract, of the deep water that runs silent and strong. She allowed Sarah to dress her hair in the severe chignon, a style that highlighted her intelligence over her beauty. She clasped a simple string of pearls around her neck, her mother's, the only ornament she would wear. She was not dressing for a party. She was arming herself for a battle. When she was ready, she went to her father's study. The room was just as he had left it. She ran a hand over his desk, over the worn leather of his chair. She felt his presence there, a steadying force. She had not only his fortune to protect, but his name, a name built on honesty and hard work. Mr. Davies was announced. He entered, his face grim but resolute, the leather folio in his hand. "Everything is in place, Miss Vance," he said. "The copies are prepared. Key members of your father's board are in attendance, as is the chairman of the bank." Amelia nodded, her composure absolute. "Thank you, Mr. Davies, for everything." She took a deep breath, the scent of beeswax and old paper filling her lungs. Then she walked out of the study and towards the grand staircase, descending towards the ballroom where her fiancé and all of London society awaited her. She entered the ballroom, and the world stopped. The full, awful weight of the silence descended upon Lord Alistair as he watched her cross the floor towards him. This was not his Amelia. This was a stranger, a queen entering her court to pass judgment. Her walk was not the hesitant step of a bride, but the deliberate, confident stride of a woman in absolute control. He saw Mr. Davies at her side, the solicitor's presence a clear and present threat. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his arrogant composure. He saw the folio in the lawyer's hands and knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Amelia stopped before him. For a moment she simply looked at him, her gaze clear and unflinching. In her eyes he saw not the adoring girl he had courted, but the reflection of his own shabby deceit. "My lord," she said, her voice perfectly calm, carrying across the silent room. "You have gathered our friends and peers to celebrate an engagement, but I fear a celebration is premature. An engagement, like any business contract, must be founded upon transparency and good faith." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Alistair's mother, standing nearby, took a step forward, her face a mask of outrage. "Amelia, what is the meaning of this insolence?" Amelia turned her cool gaze upon the dowager. "The meaning, madam, is that I have recently had the privilege of reviewing the true state of the Westfall finances." She gestured to Mr. Davies, who stepped forward. "My father taught me the importance of due diligence." Mr. Davies opened the folio. "We have here," he announced, his voice dry and precise, "copies from a private ledger detailing debts amounting to over £80,000, including personal notes of credit to gambling houses in Paris held by Lord Alistair." The crowd erupted in a furious wave of whispers. Alistair's face was now ashen. "This is slander, a forgery," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Is it?" Amelia's voice cut through the noise, quiet but sharp as a shard of glass. "Is it also slander that you and your mother planned to use my capital, which you referred to as the assets of your golden goose, to settle these personal debts the moment I was legally bound to you?" The specific, contemptuous phrase hung in the air. An irrefutable poison. The Dowager Marchioness looked as if she had been struck. Alistair stared at Amelia, his mind reeling. How could she know? He looked at her simple dress, her severe hair, and he understood nothing. He saw only the woman he had fatally underestimated. He reached for her hand. "Amelia, my darling, there has been a terrible misunderstanding." She pulled her hand back, not sharply, but with a final, deliberate grace. She looked at him, and the last ounce of pity she might have felt for him vanished. She saw only a weak man, a thief who wore a title like a costume. Then she delivered the line that would end him. "There has been a misunderstanding," she agreed, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of absolute finality. "You mistook my inheritance for my identity." Silence, complete and devastating. She had not raised her voice. She had not wept. She had simply stated a truth so profound it could not be refuted. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned, and without a backward glance walked out of the ballroom, Mr. Davies following in her wake. The silence she left behind was broken by the sound of a single champagne flute shattering on the marble floor. The consequences were immediate and absolute. The story of the disastrous engagement ball swept through London like a firestorm. Lord Alistair Beaumont became a social pariah overnight. Invitations ceased. Doors that had always been open were quietly closed. The friends who had once clapped him on the back now crossed the street to avoid him. The bank chairman, present in the ballroom, called in his loans the very next morning. Creditors, no longer held at bay by the promise of the Vance fortune, descended on Westfall Manor like the vultures the Dowager had feared. Within 6 months, the estate and its contents were sold at auction to cover a fraction of their debts. Alistair and his mother retreated to a small, damp cottage in Wales, their ancient title now nothing more than a hollow echo of a disgraced name. Amelia never spoke of it again. She did not gloat. She did not relish their downfall. To do so would have been to give the affair more importance than it deserved. It was a business arrangement that had proven fraudulent, and she had cancelled the contract. It was as simple as that. She turned her formidable energy back to the world she understood. She reinvested in the Vance foundries, funding new technologies that made them more efficient and profitable than ever before. She visited the factories, not as a distant owner, but as her father had, speaking with foremen and engineers, her questions sharp and insightful. She used her profits to build a school for the workers' children and a clean, modern infirmary. She earned not the fawning respect of society, but the genuine loyalty of the thousands of families whose livelihoods depended on her sound judgment. She established herself not as a marchioness-in-waiting, but as the quiet, undisputed master of her own industrial empire. Her name, the name of Vance, once again became synonymous not with a failed engagement, but with integrity, innovation, and a strength as reliable and enduring as the iron pulled from the earth. The community that formed around her was one built on earned respect, not inherited rank. A year passed, then another. Amelia had found a quiet, productive rhythm to her life, dividing her time between her work in the city and the country estate her father had built, a house of warm brick and sprawling gardens, not of cold ancestral stone. It was on a crisp autumn afternoon, while she was inspecting the pruning of her rose bushes, that a man appeared at the end of the long gravel drive. He was on foot, his boots muddy, his coat respectable but worn at the cuffs. He had no carriage, no servant. It was Alistair. He stood at the gate, waiting, not daring to approach the house unbidden. She felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a distant, clinical sadness for the waste of it all. She instructed her gardener to show him to the terrace, and she met him there. They did not serve tea. He looked older, the arrogance stripped from him, leaving behind something thin and weary. "Amelia," he began, his voice raspy. "I did not come to ask for anything. Only to say that you were right." She listened, her hands resting calmly on the stone balustrade. He spoke of his ruin, of his mother's bitterness, of the crushing weight of his shame. He said he finally understood what he had thrown away, that he had been blinded by pride and desperation. It was a halting, broken confession, the speech of a man who had lost everything and knew at last that he deserved it. When he was finished, a long silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the wind in the oak trees. He looked at her, a desperate, pleading question in his eyes. A second chance? A word of forgiveness? She offered neither. She simply nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement, not of absolution. "I hope you find a way to build a life of substance, my lord," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It is never too late for that." She turned and walked back into her house, leaving him standing alone on the terrace. For a title may open any door in London, but once the lock of trust is broken, even a marquis may find himself standing on the outside forever. Thank you for joining us for this story of strength and vindication. Was Amelia right to deny him a second chance, or does true character demand mercy? Let us know your thoughts and tell us where you're watching from today. We look forward to sharing our next story with you. Pride may wear diamonds, but character is a jewel that lasts forever.